Hi, welcome to a completely casual, normal, regular day in the life of the Midgard Chronicler, where I get to come to Santa Monica Studio in Los Angeles, California, and chat with some very fun, attractive guys, particularly Mihir and Bruno, who together make up the director of God of War Ragnarok Valhalla that, as of yesterday, when we were recording this, celebrated its first anniversary. Hi. Hello, guys. And how are things going?
Well, what an introduction. I mean, that's more professional than anything we do here. So, I see everyone, and super excited to celebrate Valhalla's first year anniversary.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just I can't believe that it's been a year already, and we're just super excited that people are still excited about the game, and they seem to be enjoying it out there, and that's all we can hope for, right? For people to enjoy it, and hopefully they keep playing it for a very long time. And very nice to meet you, by the way, in person. Yeah.
Yeah. Elephant in the room. I have one microphone. This is how it's gonna go, but it's gonna be a physical connection, right? Let's not talk about this anymore. That's just how it's gonna be. Yes, very nice to meet you. Also, the very fun day on Twitter yesterday, celebrating, remembering all the moments. I was recounting every single time I said "holy shit," and it's a lot of times. Looking back a year, is there a specific moment that people resonated with more than you expected? Maybe there was a moment that you didn't think would get much of attention, but it did. Is there, among all the incredible moments that you plan to be, people to have a reaction? Is there one that got more attention than you thought?
I think I think we kind of saw a lot of the reactions of what we were kind of going for, but maybe the magnitude of it was higher, right? So moments that we thought people were like, oh, this will be cool, people will enjoy this. We were seeing much stronger reactions to those things. But I would say one in particular that maybe this is just how naive I am, but I thought got a lot more attention than I anticipated is when you arrive at, after you have your first death in Valhalla, and then Freya shows up. And you have the dialogue between them, and we did some kind of clever writing in there to set it up a certain way, and definitely some players found that moment a little interesting, and I was like, oh wow, I did not expect this would land as interestingly as it did. What do you think, Bruno?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. But I'm trying to think, to be honest, about any other moment that I mean, we really hoped that a lot of those moments would land, and we anticipated that some of them would. But for me personally, I think it was just like the ending, right? What Kratos confronts behind that door. Spoilers, sorry. But, I just want to make, that was something that, until it really got out there. I mean, we knew that Chris's performance was great, and the writing was great, and the team, knocked that out of the park. But you won't really know how the fans will receive it until they actually witness it and go through it, right? So it was a relief to see that people seem to receive that final scene really well.
Just to add to that, I think one thing that you kind of look for is if something gets turned into a meme, you know that you've hit some level of cultural relevancy. Yeah. And it's pretty interesting to me that the throne shot at the end has become a meme for a lot of things. And I think it's, on one hand, it's such a serious topic, and it's almost funny for that to be taken so lighthearted. But at this other hand, it kind of shows just how much it resonated with our audience. And so I actually think we're both really kind of humble and grateful for just how that scene landed for people.
I am here to ask you about the how of Valhalla mostly. I want to know about the creative process, about the creative decisions. Also, I'm going to link this in the descriptions, but there's been a GBG interview that the guys did and when the game released, and also there's a bunch of articles on the Santa Monica website that the community team have done, going very, very in depth into the creation of this DLC. So I learned personally a lot there, and I'm gonna try and not ask anything. I'm sure we're gonna inevitably end up talking about stuff that has been mentioned there, but I'll try to talk about things we haven't really talked about or haven't been talked about. And I want to know about the first how is how did this happen, right? I think Mihir, this starts with you, right? You were the one who initially came up with the idea of a God of War roguelite, if I'm not mistaken. Well, yeah. I just want to know how did from inception to being greenlit as an official DLC for Ragnarok, how did this happen, and how did you guys end up co-directing this together?
So it doesn't start with us, actually. It starts with Eric Williams, the game director for God of War Ragnarok. And basically we had actually talked about, Valhalla, of like, is this a thing we should explore in this game? Is it something down the road? It didn't really get the traction, and at some point in development, we kind of left it behind. But then at one point, Eric kind of approached actually both of us separately to just be like, hey, like, there's something here where we want to lean more on gameplay. There's still story, but it's going to be gameplay first. It's going to explore our systems. It's going to have combat. Do you want to turn that into something as a follow-up experience? And I was told separately. Bruno was told separately. We had very different reactions to that. The short version of it is Bruno was like, hell yeah, like day one, I'm in. And I kind of had the opposite, which was like no, like I don't want to do this at all. Which is funny to say that in hindsight, but I think that we ended up chatting after and talked a little bit about like if we were going to do this, what would make us actually like excited to do it. And I actually gave a talk recently at Gamescom where I talked about this process, but we came with a list of things that like, okay, if we were going to do something, what would get us motivated? And after that phone call, we just got like pretty hyped. Like we got pretty excited on like, wait a second, we should do this. This is cool. But the concept of the game was a little open. And so the roguelike idea was there. Like I'd kind of come up and thought about it as a way to kind of push our systems and gameplay where, you don't need to create a bunch of new content necessarily, but you can create repeatability and get value from that. But I think the Santa Monica way to do stuff is not like, it has to serve some kind of meaning. There has to be a purpose behind it. And we had a conversation with Corey and Eric one time, and Corey kind of mentioned, we were kind of circling around this idea, but he's the one that kind of put it in words of like, Kratos really needs some therapy. And I was thinking about this, and that's where I was like, wait a second, like that therapy roguelike makes a lot of sense like, in so many ways. I mean, the cyclical kind of nature of repetition and doing the work. And so I think that we kind of had our different reasons, I think, initially for the motivation. But I think the idea of doing this kind of therapy roguelike story, gameplay, just this cohesive thing was super, super appealing. And Bruno's like the partner that I would like want to do it with because we've worked together for, basically a decade leading into this project. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely complemented each other very well with the different aspects of the game that we focused on. And for me, one of the things that was very exciting, being someone that had worked on this franchise since like God of War 2, was that something that's kind of strikes me sometimes when people are talking about the franchise and about Kratos, they talk about like, who do you like better, Greek Kratos or Norse Kratos? But to me, like that always seemed very strange because Kratos is Kratos to me. Kratos is the same character. He just happens to be in a different location. So this DLC, we had the opportunity to sort of present that and remind everyone that it's like this is one continuing story. So it was really nice to be able to revisit, his past, and through the therapy, that seemed like the perfect avenue to do it. And luckily, we worked at it and we found a way that the gameplay complemented the story and the other way around. Like it sort of fed into itself, and that turned out to be a win for us.
Yeah, and I think that like to your question, right? Like how does this get made? I think it gets made in one, having Eric kind of originally spur the opportunity to both of us. I think it relies on us to come up with an idea and a pitch. And the studio's kind of support of willingness, and also PlayStation's willingness to be like, this is worthwhile and we should do this. And of course, as many players might know, we released this for free. And part of that was because it was really for the fans. I mean, and the content of the DLC for anyone that's played it, like this isn't like anyone can come and enjoy it, but you're gonna get so much more out of it if you're a fan of the series. And PlayStation, understood the vision that we had around doing this for the fans, and it takes a lot of different people to come together. But I think first and foremost, it's like we want to give back to our community that have kind of supported our franchise for so long.
When you started working on the DLC, when Eric and Corey came to you, did you have to change the ending of Ragnarok anyway to accommodate for the DLC, or did you work? Oh, okay.
We had a story outline already done, but we were still quite in the development of Ragnarok. So things can change in that time, but none of it was influenced by plans about the DLC. It's the opposite. We have to adapt to wherever the game went. But yeah, we didn't. The story of the DLC, I think, came a little later as we try to figure it out. Yeah. The core part of it was just repetition, the cycle of growth for Kratos. That was the core decision, and the decision that it was going to be only Kratos. That was quite early, where we knew that, and that was actually a more of a technical reason initially of just, if you don't know about game development, making a game for one character is hard. Making it for two characters, a companion character is very complicated. And we knew that with the time that we had to do this, that would have been quite a lot to handle. And we turned that into an opportunity of saying that, okay, again, to the point I mentioned earlier, it has to be cohesive. So if we are going to do something without the companion, why? And we need the game and the story to justify that choice.
Yeah, so definitely the story came for the DLC came after the ending was established already in the main game. One of the things I personally thought that it was worth exploring was Kratos talks about a lot in his past about in both 2018 and Ragnarok, but he never really addressed the specific events that occur in Greece. So to me, that felt like an interesting opportunity to be like, what if he had to deal with those? What if he had to reveal that to his best friend Mimir, right? Like that's very personal. Perhaps maybe there's some things that he didn't tell Atreus or his wife, Faye. But so I felt like, oh, this would be a cool opportunity to explore those and also, have a fun with those callbacks, right? And a little bit of fan service as well. But it sort of all kind of fell into place neatly. Yeah.
This kind of perfectly leads into my next question. When you decided to introduce Greek stuff back, you have so much material to work with. You have music, locations, enemies, all the objects and events that Kratos can reflect on. What was the funnel that helped you to pick and choose the right elements and not get overwhelmed with all that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll let Bruno probably answer most of this one, but the quick thing I'll say is that the decisions of this, so there's a look behind the curtain at game development, the timing of when you make certain decisions is different depending on how much work is needed and the nature of that work. So things like which characters to bring back, you have to know that pretty early on because of the amount of work needed. Versus, for example, the objects that he remembers. You have more leeway to come up with that a little bit later. And so I would say for the characters, that's the main one is just when you think of classic Greek God of War, there's just a handful of characters that stand out to you. And I'm very happy that we managed to hit almost all of them. And in fact, we had tried earlier to do the Gorgon as one of them, and we realized that pulling off the Gorgon is not going to be feasible in the time that we had to a quality that we wanted. And kudos, to Corey to kind of. We were trying really hard, and Corey was like, "You're not going to be able to deliver this to the quality that we need," and he was right. He was absolutely right, and we thought it was like, "Oh no, we're failing this project by not including the character." And the good news is that we were able to execute on enough that you miss the character being there, but also I think I would make that decision again, based on what we were facing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the Gorgon. If we put our Gorgon in there and Kratos is not able to rip the head off and then use it, then why are we doing it, right? So we want to do it right, and I think in the end it's better not to. It was a right call not to put the Gorgon in. But going back to your question about specifically when it came to the pools that Kratos sees right in front of him, we wanted to pick moments because Tyr is there helping Kratos to kind of deal with these, to basically bring up questions about not everything is black and white, right? There's a gray area to Kratos. Kratos is very complex. He wanted to point that out to Kratos. So we wanted to find moments and events where it kind of brought a different perspective. It didn't mean that it would make everything go away. Everything that Kratos did that was horrible. It didn't mean that it would wipe away that necessarily, but it meant that, hey, think of that event, and perhaps there's a different way of viewing it, right? So when he pledged his allegiance to Ares, he meant to save his people, right? He didn't. At that moment, that was that decision, right? And the other instance where, yes, you did rip Hela's head off, but at one point before that, you actually saved them, right? You actually put the sun back in the sky. So it's basically just showing moments where, for Kratos to contemplate himself and his actions, and that perhaps, not everything is black and white. There's a gray area there. So that's why we picked those moments.
Yeah, to Bruno's point, that finding the right moments to highlight that actually have this ambiguity was a lot of work. And actually, Matt and Rich and all, our writing teams, and there was a lot of discussion over what should those moments be. Yeah. And because, a lot of people, even within our directors in the studio, people have worked on this franchise for a long time. And it kind of also forces us to look back at those moments and see, like, did he have the right motivation? What was really at play? And I think that was, I would say, in the story, deciding the story, which 3 moments to highlight was probably the most difficult, challenging part of it, because you want it to be authentic. You want the fans to be able to say that, no, you're not retconning this. You're not making this up. Like, this is truly in his story. And we all kind of felt it, but we needed to do some homework to really know, like, which 3 moments felt the most compelling.
You don't want to justify Kratos' actions or redeem them completely, right? It's just more bringing up a question of, like, hey, there's a different way of looking at it. That's it, right? Just that's what Tyr wanted to implant in Kratos' mind so he can kind of move forward.
Yeah, that was probably narratively one of the most mind-blowing moments, that when Tyr asked, what would have happened if you didn't pledge to Ares in that moment, right? Because in God of War 1, it's framed like all Kratos cared about is, glory of Sparta, being the, greatest general Spartans known. And, thinking about stuff like that, like, if Kratos died, what would have happened to Sparta, right? It's just to the point of how incredible the work that you did was to reframe it perfectly and to add dimension, going back to these old games and thinking about those moments retrospectively. It's like you didn't only use the past to enhance Kratos' current story, but you also enhance those past stories. Every time I'll think about Chains of Olympus, I'll think about Helios and Kratos' relationship to him, of course. Yeah, so good job, guys. Yeah.
No, I think we really appreciate you saying that, and obviously you're super fan, and we love your content. And one of the things that I think we, I'll speak a little personally, and some people know this, but, like, I grew up as a fan of God of War games. Like, I'm in this industry in large part to really enjoying those games, and I think there was a kind of depth to the storytelling of those games that often was underappreciated. And I think what you just said is, I think, at the heart of what we try to do is we reframe and add value. Just speaking a little bit about God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, people say, like, oh, that's one game, that's a sequel. We don't really see it that way. I think the terminology, we use internally is that we say, like, it's book 1 and book 2 of the same book, right? The same series. And so our thinking is that Ragnarok should make 2018 better, and 2018 should make Ragnarok better. And then when we look at something like Valhalla, where the goal is to kind of re-examine Kratos' past, one of the goals we have is genuinely creating value in every single title. That if you go back and play Ragnarok, it's better because of Valhalla. If you go back and play 2018, it's better. If you go back and play the old games, it's better. And we could not do that if the original content did not have these things inside of it, right? And so that's, I think, something we really, really care about, is that every decision that we make, is it actually adding value to the whole series? And because that's the way that we think we can celebrate the series and celebrate the fans of the series, is that, when, you play Valhalla and you think back to when you played one of those games, you're thinking more positively about that game than before. And so I think, for us as directors on the project, we're feeling that already in development. That's kind of a compass that tells you whether something is right or it doesn't fit. Is that, Bruno has worked on God of War for, I don't know, 89 years? How long?
Since God of War 2, it was 2006 when I first started.
Exactly, 2006. So, I mean, like, like 18, close to 19 years on the series, but still being so excited and motivated and a fan of the series. We're the first kind of gate that if we're not excited by this, why would our fans be?
I want to talk about the ending. We got to talk about the ending, amplified, of course, by the brilliant performance of Chris Judge. Again, coming back to the creative process, how things came to be. Kratos' arc through the Norse saga feels so natural and so cohesive, even, starting with the ending of God of War 3, really, if you look at it, and that his arc of acceptance of himself, of his past, and also perhaps acceptance of his new purpose, sitting on that throne. When in the development, like over the last 11 years, scary number, of this Norse saga, did you know that is perhaps where you want Kratos to end up? Did it start with Corey in 2018? Is there an exact time when this decision for that moment came to be?
We did not know anything throughout the development of these games. We had to make decisions on Valhalla, but some of it, and this is the funny thing about game development, is that like a lot of times the game tells you, part of it is what you bring to the game, but then the other thing is one of the things you're doing is just bringing the natural process of what has already been laid for you in the game. And I mean, we had a lot of internal discussion about that ending. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that was we did have a lot of discussions about what that ending would be. I mean, to answer your question, like it was not something that was predetermined that's where the whole thing was going to end. It was something that we decided as we were developing Valhalla, of course, with the help of Corey and Eric and Matt and Rich and the writing team. Like we collaborated to reach this decision, but definitely at first it was there was some questions about whether having him sit on the throne once again was the right call. Because of the symbolism of Kratos, what it meant for him to sit on the throne the first time. But definitely there was something that I really felt it was important to demonstrate, that it's not the throne, it's not the symbol that is important, it's the man, it's the person that sits in it, and how they, what they do with that responsibility, right, with that authority. And I felt that, it was important for Kratos to repeat and, again, bring it to a full circle, how the first game ended, for him to sit on that throne, but it completely different meaning, right? And then another cool thing was, bringing Tyr into it. He's confronting another God of War. The second time he's fought a God of War, really, in the whole franchise. But now the context is completely different, right? So again, bringing everything into full circle. Like people make fun of me. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, right? And there's always that quote that goes around with George Lucas saying, like, it's like poetry, it rhymes. I always say it all the time, right? So I think it's actually, there's some truth behind that. And I think for this particular ending, I think it definitely was good for it to rhyme.
And of course, the poetic ending of Kratos facing literally his past self on that throne moments after he's defeated Ares. Was that always how you saw? Were there any other ideas for how Kratos's, this arc is going to end?
I mean, I think I know what you're asking. Like, I think you're alluding, like, was there ever an idea for him to fight himself? no. no. But that's no. That I'm just kidding. But no, that is actually a fair thing to think about. Because that could have been an option, right? That we could have explored. But in the end, I think it would have been counterproductive to Kratos reaching that moment of acceptance, right? Because it's really, again, going back to the notion that this is the same character, that started back in the Greek saga, and now he's here. It's the same character. So to fight himself really is more of a internal thing. And in that whole conversation that he's having with himself, this was something that we discussed early on in the story of Valhalla. Like, he needs to talk to himself. He needs to deal with himself. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think that when this whole idea for therapy of Kratos, right? That's really early on. Yes. So to get that, you need a breakthrough. Yes. So the question is, what is the breakthrough? Yes. And there were a couple of ways it could have gone. Confronting his past self was definitely, I would say, the highest. But it was also confronting his past family, as a very likelihood. I mean, we even talked about, for example, looking into a mirror and seeing back, his family. We explored a lot of different options, and ultimately we found that the most appropriate for the story was a personal one of himself. That's really what it is based in. And that's why, we have the objects in the kind of, finding the flute and with Lysandra and Calliope and those stories that are still there. They're present. But that wasn't really the core of the story we were trying to tell. So I think that it was true that early on, before we even knew the story, before we knew the 3 events that we were going to examine, the breakthrough was kind of known. We were quite clear on he will confront himself. How that happens, if that's on the throne, if that's somewhere else, that's where those decisions are made. But I think it was pretty clear early on that to justify the breakthrough, like if you're going to go through this big process, you need something that's worthy of that process. And this felt like the ultimate kind of way. It's the biggest question in the whole series, is that how would old Kratos think of a younger version of himself if he actually had to face him, right? And we've seen a little bit of this tease in the Norse Saga, right? In the first game, when you go to Helheim and you see a little bit of it's coming back. This isn't a completely brand new idea, but I think that's what makes it more authentic, is that this has been on his mind. It's been on his head, especially the conversation he has with Atreus at the end of the first game, and then again in kind of Helheim in the second game as they talk about family. Like, this is always in Kratos' mind. And so again, kind of the poetry, it rhymes. Like, it's a natural conclusion. And then the throne being the kind of the symmetry of like, you can tell the differences more when there are similarities, right? As a general principle of comparison. So just because you see them both on the throne, actually the differences stand out more because of that.
I didn't mean to ask about the fights, but I understand. I know it's a popular sentiment in the community, perhaps, but it was just Mihir kind of answered the question, because it's also incredible that Kratos' arc in 2018 specifically, I have nothing more to hide, right? Because he internalized everything, and that I don't mean to recite you played the game, right? And it's so beautiful that he I hear the music in my head right now, and that he opened up to Atreus, perhaps he opened up to Freya and Ragnarok and all his friends, but to open up to himself, right? That's the final step, right? And a physical confrontation doesn't really achieve that result. I want to ask about, out of a million surprises, one that I feel people don't really bring up as much is the return of Magni and Modi, to shift things a little bit. People talk about Greek stuff, people talk about Tyr. Magni and Modi are there. How did that happen? Obviously, you had to revamp them as well from 2018. What was the thought process for that?
Oh, yeah. I love that you're asking this. Magni and Modi, we were actually pretty keen on revisiting them. They're pretty major characters. I mean, they're gods. They're in the pantheon. You fight them, as a duo in 2018. And so this idea that you've never fought them alone, but also what they symbolize. And there's some great writing. I'm allowed to be a fanboy of the writing because I had some influence on it, but I get to enjoy it sometimes as a fan, with Bruno being a little bit closer to that side of the fence. But I really, really like the concept of how Kratos' guilt is kind of represented, and that in some ways, like, they never had a chance. Right? This comes up in the narrative, is that they didn't really have a chance. When you look at the family they were brought into, they're kind of products of that environment. One of the things we do in our narrative, of course, is that we have, we use cloning, like the fact that you can have one character in one context clone to another character in a different context, and the comparisons in between, right? Yeah. And then you look at, both of these are the sons of their fathers as gods, and there's something really kind of almost beautiful about this concept of there's a redemption of that shame of how you deal with Magni and Modi, and fighting them is to honor them. And these themes, I think, are so critical because you're getting a look into the mind of Kratos in a way you don't see. And there's something like noble about that, almost in a weird, in a strange sense, and kind of showing that side of Kratos to our audience, I think, is important. And on the combat side, we wanted to play around with those fights, give them a little bit of a different flavor, seeing how they feel like one-on-one. and having some fun with it. The role of that fight changed a little bit in development. We had there was one version of this where you would actually always fight either Magni or Modi every single time on a run, as kind of your let's call it a mid-run boss fight kind of a thing. And we were going to kind of put more into that, and we decided to actually scale that back and have them be more of something that shows up a little bit later as you get deeper into the the psyche of Kratos. And that first moment, I mean, it's like comedy when it's like Magni, like it's just like there's sometimes comedy just kind of lands, and it's kind of nice. We ended up tuning them down a little bit. They were kind of meant to be a little bit more tough, and we ended up being like, no, they're just the flow. They appear, they tell a story, and they're kind of fun fights, and they have their flavors, right? You got you got the brute, versus you got the kind of squirmy, personalities, and so we kind of dial those things up a little bit, and brought a little bit of the lightning action that you kind of we brought with Thor. So yeah, I'm glad you brought them up. They were fun fights. We had our designer Adam Oliver work on both of them and kind of bring them back, and I think they're a fun project to work on for sure.
I am always very interested for a game like God of War that is so narratively heavy. There needs to be constant union of narrative and gameplay decisions. And the article that came out yesterday actually talked a little bit about that. Orion Walker kind of talked about the process of, you brought it up too, using the concept of cyclical nature of Valhalla and how that creates a story. There is a very specific thing in Valhalla that is kind of, I want to know about. It's very nerdy. It's very in-depth. But there is a troll fight. Mini boss Mikli Mooner, his name is, and when you I call him Milky. And when you defeat him, there is a journal entry where it kind of explains why Kratos encountered that particular troll. And for those who don't know, in Ragnarok you encounter him in the spot where you rescue Tyr, and Kratos reflects on that he probably encountered this particular troll because he still mourns Brock, essentially. What's the chicken and the egg in this situation? Did the narrative team kind of think of a particular troll to bring back, or did you have a specific troll you wanted and then the narrative team had to come up with a narrative reason for Kratos to encounter him?
You're asking how the sausage is made, and the answer to this really depends on but in this particular case, if I'm not mistaken, it was combat first. It was basically that we were looking at a list of what we would call kind of mini bosses that we wanted. And we were thinking of the trolls, and we don't feature trolls as prominently in Ragnarok as 2018 when we look at the variants of gameplay. But we like that one. That one's a little bit, he's got some fire jumps. He's got, he's a little bit more of a characteristic troll, and so that it starts from there. And sometimes, I mean, this is where the best stuff on the team happens, is when the team takes ownership of like, we want this to matter. Right? So sometimes that's directed. Sometimes that comes from the top saying, this is important, this needs to be here, this is how the Blade of Olympus is going to be, set up, or whatever that is. Those are top-down decisions. But then there's stuff where the team says, hey, this is a coincidence. This is interesting. Mm-hmm. Could we go and add value to this? And what's amazing on a project on Valhalla is that we kind of need to rely on our team for the speed that we're moving at. We're not getting this kind of cohesion if we don't have the team bought in. Yeah. And so I think that's a case, and I could be wrong here, but I'm almost positive that was kind of a narrative opportunity through the journal to be like, wait, we can stitch something into the story. And, you see something like that and you're like, this is so good. This is amazing. So that particular case was not directed or top down. It started with, this is a good troll for combat. Let's take that. But there's other examples where it might be, maybe narrative making a request, and then we solve something in the gameplay to achieve that. And to me, that's like the best of both worlds. Like you want things to be influenced from both ends, but you want everyone to be invested in the meaning, the purpose behind it. So yeah, the journal of Valhalla is like low-key one of my favorite things about the series, and just like how much attention was given, and actually real props needs to be given to Eric on the importance of this, because we were closing, when you close a game, it's pretty chaotic. You're trying to solve everything, and the journal we had developed, but we hadn't really gone that big on it. And we had Eric play through the game, and he's like, I love it. The one thing though, you gotta invest in the journal. The journal has to be held to a higher standard. And we were looking at all the resources we had, and we're like, oh my god, we don't know if we can do this. But it was like, you know what? Eric's got his like, you know, he has his one game director card. He gets to play and give us a directive, and that was the thing. He said, all of this is fine. Just pay attention to the journal. And I'm super glad he did. I think it was absolutely the right call. And we, you know, our writers really, you know, Rich, I remember just putting the thinking hat on and being like, okay, we're going to really dig into this. And it's really quite a special way that we deliver narrative in that project. Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no. I think it was one of the best parts is how the journal entries are addressed to Atreus from Kratos. Like, that was such a huge win and really meaningful.
Like, coming back to like adding dimension to past games where you read about the Cyclops, right, and how Ares bred the Minotaurs. It's not really something that is addressed in the original games, but this is something that you just add to it, right? And of course that additional dimension that is not brought up at all in the DLC really, but that, you know, of course Kratos misses Atreus. Of course he kind of also almost lost purpose when Atreus left, that during Ragnarok he started like going crazy, killed Heimdall because Atreus was in danger in his opinion. They were separated, and to kind of reflect that in the DLC, of course he's working on himself. It's the Kratos DLC about Kratos, but at the same time, of course, life goes on. The realms go on, and his son isn't there. So, of course, he would be kind of reflecting on that on top of all the... Yeah.
A lot of players do, too, because they hit that square button, and then they're like, wait, I'm used to hitting that square button. What's happening? And, you know, there's some players are like, hell yeah, I'm by myself, you know? That's fine. That's normal. But you also get players that kind of... That feeling of missing Atreus, they're feeling it too a little bit, and just noticing like, oh, that's weird, right? And actually, it's funny that question of should there be something on the square button was actually something we considered a lot, right? Because you put on the gameplay mechanics side and designer, you're like, oh, we could do something we don't do in the game. Oh, cool. What could it be? What if it was this ability? What if it was that? It's a new mechanic. And then the more we thought about it, the more I remember the conversation we had, because I told I was like, I think I could do these three things. Like, I don't think I want to. I actually think it's better that as a player, you feel it. You hit that button, you feel like nothing happened, and that's like kind of the point of part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kratos had to adapt to fight with that Atreus, so that reflects also on the player, right? Yeah. Like now that button's doesn't do anything, and it's like is the I miss you button.
And what people might not know is actually the tuning of the game. And so getting a little bit into the nuts and bolts, but actually even the way the enemies behave in Valhalla is different to account for the fact that Atreus isn't there. Yeah, that projectile pressure is lower. Like there's a lot of stuff that's there. Even though it's the same game, behind the scenes, it's kind of a different game. It's tuned completely differently for that experience. Which, to be honest, again, because we're nerds that like to build games, it was actually really fun to be like, wait, we have to like change all of this. That's a different story, but all the fun of making it.
Yeah, I noticed when you fight a white, I think that's the name, right? And normally wisps come out, and you have to shoot the wisps to defeat them, but I'm like, oh, no wisps. Yeah, makes sense. And ironically, I play Valhalla, and then I go play Ragnarok, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can press the square button now. So it's almost the opposite for me, where I forget I have the square button to use. I have a whole sun to use to, or Freya, because I finished the story. Another thing that yesterday's article talked about is risk, right? And I feel like for the Norse saga, risk is kind of the definition, right? Of course, 2018, such a massive change in the formula. Then Ragnarok, doing crazy stuff like 100 companions, Atreus as a playable character. I'm sure that was not an easy thing to pull off or decide, and then Valhalla, like a completely, different thing. Do you think risk is a part of creating something special moving forward, as a creative unit, as a team, as a studio? Is that something that is necessary to continue, creating games that resonate with people to that extent?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. Like there is risk inherent in anything that you are creating, right? I think the question is kind of where do you employ risk? So you think of risk as something like you could take risks on every single thing, right? You might not get very far if you do that. you might take risks in nothing, and then you end up with something that isn't inspiring. It doesn't really reach to people's hearts, right? So I think a lot of times we ask ourselves, where do we want to take the risks, and how much risk do we take? Sometimes we stumble into that. Sometimes we make decisions around that. I think Valhalla was a case, more so than we've done in the past, of being very deliberate about the risks we want to take. Oftentimes we dream big at the studio. We really, really think like quite large, and if it's not making us feel extremely uncomfortable, then we're probably doing something wrong. But Valhalla was an interesting twist on this, where there was risk, but there was a lot of thinking about where should we make the risk and how. And I think the big difference is that because we were given this constraint of a year of development, with this kind of a smaller team than we would normally have on a project, we knew that if we weren't smart about our risk, we probably won't be able to do this. And so it forced us to grow and change. But the DNA of taking risk is absolutely inherent in any kind of big creative pursuit.
Yeah, you said it. You said it all. I mean, basically, if you don't feel a little bit scared or nervous about what you're working on, then you're probably not pushing it hard enough. Yeah, so you definitely have to have that feeling, whether you like it or not.
I want to nerd out a little bit. Bruno, you mentioned, not nerd out, I've been nerding out for the last 2 hours. You said yourselves, you're nerds. Bruno, you're a massive Star Wars fan. I'm also a big Star Wars fan. And I can name a couple of things throughout the God of War franchise that were inspired by Star Wars. But, I'm interested in your very long career in the studio. Are there any specific things in your work that you took from Star Wars as an inspiration?
A couple of things I could think of in Valhalla specifically. I mean, I had the opportunity to actually put more of it because I was co-directing with Mihir. But and it's still in our original pitch for Valhalla. It's a slide, literally a slide in one of our pitches. The whole idea of Valhalla was based around Dagobah, right? Where specifically the cave. So, Luke Skywalker tells Yoda what's in there, and Yoda says only what you take with you, right? So that concept of whatever you have with you and you take into that cave is going to manifest. So that was it. Like once we came up with that idea and referenced it to Star Wars, that was a perfect way to explain to people how Valhalla would work, right? Because Luke goes in there and sees Darth Vader, sees himself. Once he cuts that fake Vader's head off. So essentially, that was exactly what Kratos was going to experience. He was going to bring his memories, his experiences, his past. He was gonna put that and bring that in there. So that's a very more of a profound example of it, very deep example of it. One that is a little bit more just because I wanted to do it because it's cool, looks awesome, is when Sigrid rescues Kratos and Mimir. You have essentially the jump to hyperspace when it goes right and exits. That is totally what it is. It's just make her jump into hyperspace. That's exactly what I said. And that's my little 2 homages to Star Wars right there in Valhalla.
What is your Star Wars Mihir? What is your thing that you're for Bruno, Star Wars, for me it's God of War. Do you have something like that, and did you bring any of it into your work?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to combat and gameplay and things like that, I mean, I'm a fan of action games, and particularly Japanese melee action is definitely in my DNA. I like fighting games, so I'm always thinking about, and also I'm saying this as if it's individual, but this is kind of in the DNA of the studio with, with Eric and Jason McDonald and many others at the studio that I've kind of learned from. But just it has to be fun on the buttons, and there's a strong philosophy of that. I think as far as Valhalla is concerned, I would say that for me, a big thing that overlaps with my own kind of motivation is the kind of the more philosophical messages in Valhalla. So this was actually really true to me from the beginning, is kind of this notion of, and we have this line in Valhalla, master thyself, which is a really thing, and the Greek connection to stoicism in kind of Kratos' past, and also for someone like myself, kind of being brought up in South Asian kind of philosophy and learnings, that this kind of teaching that through cycles, everything is kind of cyclical. And through that, the only thing you can really have control or influence is yourself. And so that's where you need to invest and where everything comes back to. And so there's almost something kind of, I don't know, something very resonant in Valhalla around that message. And I think there's something beautiful about not just Kratos going through that message, but the player. Like you literally need to master yourself, right? Like everything that Air and Gunnar are talking to you about is all about, this ideas of adaptation or preparation or different ways of mastering yourself. And I think that theme for me was like really important and really resonant. Definitely that's one of the things I'm really, really happy with, kind of the message of that story. But in terms of gameplay and combat, I mean, I play pretty much everything. And ultimately, I love game feel. I love just when you push a button and it feels good. I'm also although I don't play that much today, I'm also a drummer, and so like I like.
Me too.
Yeah, so I like rhythm, I like feel, and this completely translates into my love of combat design and kind of, especially working on player characters, of just like what can you do on the buttons, what feels good, and that motivates us for everything you do. So I had a little other anecdote on Valhalla is that we made the spear and we dropped near the spear in Ragnarok, but we know you only get that towards maybe 65-70% of the game. And by that time, most people, you already have enough with the axe and the blades. And so some people really enjoy Dropnir. Some are like, it's fun to throw really quickly, and then you don't really use it. So one of my goals in Valhalla was like, I want people to see how fun this weapon could be. And so we designed it to be where we're pushing you in different paths. And we had an overwhelming amount of players that they liked the spear. They were like, it's cool, but it's not really my thing. And then they play Valhalla, and they're like, wait a second. Like, I didn't know I loved the spear this much. And for me, these are the things that, it's not quite answering your question, but it's kind of like what motivates me. It's kind of like, I want players to appreciate things about the game that they didn't even know existed. Right. One thing that, and you'll appreciate this being part of the community, is that everyone, when they play the game, they think they're experiencing the whole game, but they're just playing a small slice of how they play the game. Right? I always say this, that every player, you see a giant skill tree, you pick the 3 or 4 attacks you're going to do, and you play the whole game with them, right? That's what most people do. But your 3 or 4 attacks are probably different than the other person next to you, right? And that's what Valhalla really tries to do. And if it's successful, it makes you appreciate that I didn't even know this stuff was here. It was always here. You can go back and play the base game. The base game is better because of that. I know a lot of people that played New Game Plus after playing Valhalla, and they were like, I'm having more fun because that blades attack, like that was terrible. I'm never using that. Turns out that actually that's a really fun thing to do. So I think for me, there's this, not so much strong inspiration from an IP, but also a really strong inspiration from, you think you know our game, and I want to challenge you that you probably don't know it as well as you think you do. And it would be awesome to have you experience that with, a different lens.
Guys, thank you so much for coming here to your place of work to talk to me. Congratulations. Your baby is 1 year old. Fantastic to talk to you. Any final words to the people out there, to the God of War community, to the God of War fans?
I'll just say that, thanks for tuning in, and just run and say that, again, love your content. We watch pretty much everything that comes out.
Yes.
You've been there. You're like the most like wholesome presence. It's kind of ridiculous. The internet is, it's a wide place with lots of perspectives, and I feel like you've always, you're a fan of the games, which is great. But I think more importantly than that, I think you're like a really, great impact on the community overall. So really appreciate you coming. Hopefully you guys found this interesting and some useful insights here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I echo Mihir's sentiments. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for being so positive. And we appreciate feedback in any way, but you always point out things, but you do it in a constructive manner, which we appreciate. And and it's great to have fans like you and fans like everybody else that's watching this. If you're watching this, you're probably a fan of God of War. And we couldn't be here doing this for almost 20 years as a franchise without the support of all the fans out there. And this is why we do it. We want to keep this going to make fans happy. We're fans of the franchise ourselves. We love it.
And we're fans of our fans.
We're fans of our fans, right?
True.
Yeah, absolutely true. And but I just want to say thanks for all the support. Thanks for giving us a chance to keep making these games, and hopefully we can keep doing this for a long time.
Thank you, guys. Bye. Please go back to work and make more games. Bye.